The salt-laced wind that swept through Liberty Bird Wharf carried with it the stench of rot and desperation.
It was a symphony of decay, a harmony of rust, brine, and the ever-present odor of fish guts left to fester on the cobblestones. This was Euler's world, a sprawling slum clinging to the city's industrial artery like a persistent barnacle. The sky, perpetually choked with the smog from factory stacks and the miasma from the polluted water, was a sheet of tarnished gray. Here, life was not lived. It was endured. It was a frantic, brutal scramble for scraps, a philosophy the locals grimly referred to as scalding meat, where the weak were devoured by the strong, and kindness was a currency too expensive for anyone to afford. Euler was the weakest of the weak, thin and small for her age,
with hair the color of dust and eyes that seemed to absorb the wharf's perpetual gloom.
She was a ghost haunting the edges of a nightmare. Her parents, claimed by a fever that swept through the slums like a scythe,
had left her with nothing but a hollow ache in her chest and a name nobody cared to learn.
She survived by being invisible, by doing small chores for neighbors' mental debts, scrubbing bricks,
delivering messages for which she was paid in stale bread,
bruised fruit, or a few coppers. This meager income was a lifeline, and every day was a battle to protect it.
The children of the wharf were not children in the true sense of the word.
They were miniature predators, their innocence scoured away by hunger and neglect, their games replaced with tested cruelty. Euler was their favorite prey. They saw in her timidity an invitation, a weakness to be exploited. One evening,
the gray sky was bleeding into a bruised purple as Euler scurried home,
clutching a paper-wrapped piece of fried fish. It was a rare treat, its greasy warmth a small scent in her cold hands. She had spent the entire day hauling crates for a grumpy merchant, and this was her reward. The smell alone was intoxicating, a promise of a full belly for the first time in a week. She took the winding, narrow alleyways,
hoping the usual invisibility cloak would serve her well.
It didn't. Look what the tide dragged in.
A sneering voice echoed off the grimy brick walls.
3 boys, older and broader than her, emerged from the shadows, blocking her path. The leader,
a lout named Jax, with a perpetually runny nose and mouth.
Piggy eyes, grinned, showing a gap where a tooth used to be. Smells good. Rat girl, he said, his cronies chuckling behind him. Euler's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She pressed the fish to her chest, her knuckles white. Please, she whispered, her voice barely a squeak. I worked all day for it, and we're gonna work real hard to get it. Another boy chortled. Pleading was a mistake. On the wharf, it was the same as baring your throat. It only excited the predators. They closed in, their shadows swallowing her. Jax's hand shot out, grabbing the package. Euler flinched, turning away, but his fingers snagged the paper. A tug of war began,
a pathetic struggle between her desperation and their casual cruelty.
The paper tore, a golden, battered fish tumbled onto the filthy, damp cobblestones. A sob caught in Euler's throat. It wasn't just food, it was her entire day's labor. Her hope, lying in the filth. Jax and his friends laughed, a harsh,
grating sound that scraped her raw nerves.
One of them kicked the fish, sending it skittering into a puddle of stagnant water. Enjoy your dinner, a rat girl. Jax spat, and they sauntered off, their laughter echoing down the alley. Euler collapsed against the wall, her small body racked with silent, shuddering sobs. The world was a place of insatiable thugs, and she was the cheap food they snatched away.
Thinness and timidity were not just personality traits.
They were a death sentence, a slow, agonizing one. Despair, cold and heavy as a lead blanket, settled over her. This was her life. This was all it would ever be. And then a different shadow fell over her. Not menacing, but solid. She looked up, her vision blurred by tears. A girl stood there, perhaps a few years older than her,
with a confident posture and a look of fierce disapproval on her face.
She held a box of popcorn,
its buttery aroma a stark contrast to the alley's stench.
The girl didn't say anything to Euler at first. She simply turned and strode after the bullies. Her voice, when it came, was not a shout, but a low, dangerous command. Hey, Jax and his friends turned, their amusement fading into uncertainty. The girl was not large, but she carried herself with an aura of unshakable strength. "You think it's fun, tormenting someone smaller than you?" she asked, her voice calm, edged with steel. "What's it to you?" Jack's posture, puffing out his chest. The girl took another step forward. "It's this to me." She moved with a speed that was startling. It wasn't a wild brawl. It was a precise, controlled burst of violence. A swift kick swept Jax's legs out from under him before his cronies could react.
A blur of motion saw one of them nursing a bruised jaw and the other scrambling backward in terror.
It was over in seconds. They fled, whimpering, disappearing into the labyrinthine alleys. The strong girl watched them go, her expression unreadable. Then she turned back to Euler, her face softening. She walked over and knelt, reaching out a hand. Euler flinched instinctively, but the hand was gentle as it stroked her dusty hair. "Are you okay?" the girl asked softly. Euler could only nod, mesmerized by this sudden, impossible act of salvation. The girl smiled, a small, genuine smile that was like a lantern lit in the gloom. She looked at the ruined fish in the puddle, then at Euler's tear-streaked face. Without a word, she pushed the box of popcorn into Euler's trembling hands. "Here," she said, "this is better anyway." And with that, she stood up and walked away, vanishing into the twilight as quickly as she had appeared. Euler sat there for a long time, the warmth of the popcorn box seeping into her cold fingers. It was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for her. And now, something shifted inside her. The despair didn't vanish, but it was joined by a newer, fiery emotion, a desperate, burning longing. She didn't just want to be safe. She wanted to be the safety. She longed to be like that girl, strong, confident, capable of chasing away the monsters. From that day forward, Liberty Bird Wharf had a new ghost. Euler still did her chores, still kept to the shadows, but now she was an observer. She watched the brawlers by the taverns, the enforcers for the petty gangs, the scrappy dogs fighting over bones. She studied movement. She saw how strength was not just about size, but about leverage, timing, and an utter commitment to the motion. She saw how the truly dangerous predators didn't roar. They waited, coiled, and struck when the opening was perfect. She began to train in secret, in the derelict warehouses by the water's edge. Her body, once a liability, became a project. She pushed herself past the point of exhaustion, her muscles screaming in protest. She started with simple exercises, building a core of strength she never knew she possessed. Then she started practicing movements. She mimicked the stray cats, their fluid grace and explosive pounces. But most of all, she was drawn to the serpents. She had once seen a dock worker kill a sea snake that had been caught in the net. Even as it was dying, it had moved with a terrifying, hypnotic grace, coiling and striking with blinding speed. That image became her creed. Brute force was for fools like Jax. True power was in the waiting, in the conservation of energy, in the single, perfect, venomous strike that ended the fight before it truly began. She developed a style entirely her own. It was defensive, evasive, a dance of avoidance. She would let her opponents exhaust themselves, flailing at shadows. She learned to read their movements, to anticipate their attacks, to see the subtle shifts in weight that telegraphed their intent. Her legs, once spindly and weak, became her primary weapons. They were long, fast, and could generate a surprising amount of force. She practiced kicks for hours on end, kicking at sacks of sand, wooden posts, her bare feet becoming tough and calloused. She called her signature move a leaping, spinning kick aimed at the head. The skull would crack. It was a desperate, all-or-nothing attack, but it was hers. Years passed. Euler grew, not just in age, but in presence. She was still quiet, still unassuming. But the fear in her eyes had been replaced by a watchful, reptilian stillness. Her passive, violent element had taken root. Her body was tougher, her spirit more resilient. She was no longer a victim. The first test came, as it was bound to, in Jax. He hadn't gotten any smarter, only bigger and meaner. He and his new crew cornered an old man who ran a soup stall, trying to shake him down for protection. Money. Euler was nearby, mending a sail. She heard the old man's pleas and the familiar, cruel laughter of his tormentors. the Euler of old would have hidden. But this was a different Euler. She put down her needle, stood up, and walked toward them. "Leave him alone, Jax," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise of the wharf. Jax turned, a look of disbelief on his face that quickly curdled into a sneer. Well, if it isn't Rat Girl, grown a spine, have you?" "I've grown more than that," Euler replied, her body settling into a relaxed, ready stance. Jax laughed and lunged at her, his fists swinging like clumsy mallets. Euler didn't retreat. She swayed, letting the punch whistle past her ear. He swung again, and she ducked under it. A fluid, serpentine motion. He was all aggression, all rage. She was all patience. She was waiting. This was her bash, her combat boost. Each dodge, each moment she endured, was her coiling, building power, waiting for the perfect moment. She could feel the critical chance ticking up, a predatory instinct humming within her. Frustrated, Jax roared and charged. A wild, sloppy tackle. This was the opening. As he came in, Euler exploded into motion. She didn't meet his force with force. She used his own momentum against him, pivoting on one foot and bringing her other leg up in a vicious arc. The kick connected with the side of his knee with a sickening crunch. He screamed and fell, clutching his leg. His two cronies stared in shock before charging her together. Euler didn't panic. She leapt into the air, twisting her body, and delivered a brutal skull-crack kick to the head of one, who crumpled instantly. She landed and, in the same motion, drove the heel of her other foot into the stomach of the second, who folded with a wheezing gasp. The entire fight took less than 10 seconds. Jax lay on the ground, whimpering. Euler stood over him, not with triumph, but with a cold, detached finality. "The wharf has enough rats," she said, her voice a low hiss. "Don't make me start clearing out the nests." She walked away, leaving the three of them broken on the cobblestones. The old soup vendor and a handful of other onlookers stared at her with a mixture of awe and fear. They had just seen the timid, invisible girl transform into something terrifyingly efficient. Word of the fight spread like wildfire. They started calling her Blackfoot for the lethal kicks that seemed to come from nowhere. But another name, whispered in the darker corners of the slum, began to take hold. It was born from the way she moved, the way she waited, the cold, unnerving stillness in her eyes before she struck. They called her the Serpent. Euler hadn't sought power, but it found her nonetheless. The weak and the victimized began to come to her. They didn't ask her to be a hero. They asked her to be a shield. At first, she refused, wanting only to be left alone, but she saw her own terrified reflection in their eyes. She couldn't turn away. She started to enforce her own brand of extrajudicial justice. She didn't form a gang. She became a force of nature. If a merchant was being extorted, Blackfoot would appear. If a child was being bullied, Blackfoot would intervene. Her methods were swift, brutal, and efficient. She never killed, but she left no doubt about who was in control. The established gangs of Liberty Bird Wharf, like the brutal Iron Crows, saw her as a threat to their ecosystem. Their leader, a mountain of a man named Gash, who was famed for his iron-knuckled fists, decided to make an example of her. He and a dozen of his best men cornered her in the central fish market at dusk. "Serpent," Gash boomed, his voice echoing through the empty stalls. "I hear you think you run these docks. This is Crow territory. You pay tribute, or you get your wings clipped permanently." Euler stood alone, surrounded. The air was thick with the smell of fish and the promise of violence. She didn't answer. She just watched, her eyes darting from man to man, calculating, assessing. She was coiling. Hit her. Gash ordered. The crows swarmed, and the dance began. Euler was a phantom, a whisper of motion between the market stalls. She used the environment, vaulting over crates, sliding under tables. She never engaged more than one at a time. A quick jab to a throat, a sweeping kick to a knee, a precise strike to a nerve cluster. Each attack was designed to incapacitate, not to brawl. She was stacking her critical boost, her focus narrowing, her predatory instincts sharpening to a razor's edge. One by one, the crows fell, groaning on the ground. Soon, only Gash was left, standing amidst his fallen men, his face purple with rage. He was a bull, and she was the matador, which he roared, charging at her, his iron knuckles glinting in the fading light. He was fast for a big man, but Euler was faster. She dodged his first swing, the wind of it rustling her hair. She evaded a second, and a third. She was drawing it out, letting his frustration build, letting his form get sloppy. She felt the power cresting within her, the moment of absolute certainty. The third layer of critical boost clicked into place. Now, as Gash lunged for a fourth time, swinging with all his might, Euler didn't dodge. She moved into the attack. In a move of breathtaking audacity, she dropped to one knee, letting the ironclad fist sail inches over her head. At the same time, she pivoted and launched herself upward from her crouch, her body uncoiling like a spring-loaded serpent. It wasn't a kick, it was an ascension. Her leg shot up, the heel of her boot aimed directly at Gash's jaw. The impact was like a thunderclap, a perfect critical hit. Gash's head snapped back, his eyes rolling up into his skull. The giant of a man was lifted off his feet by the force of the blow before crashing to the ground. Utterly unconscious, Euler landed lightly on her feet, breathing steadily. She stood in the center of the carnage, alone, still figure surrounded by the wreckage of the iron crows. From the shadows of the market, the wharf's denizens had been watching, their faces pale with terror and wonder. One old woman, a fishmonger whose stall Gash had smashed a week prior, whispered the words that would define Euler for the rest of her life. "She is not just a serpent," the old woman breathed. "She is their queen." The name stuck. Euler, the extrajudicial Blackfoot, became the Snake Queen of Liberty Bird Wharf. She ruled not from a throne, but from the shadows, a silent, watchful protector. She brought a harsh, brutal peace to the slum, a balance maintained not by laws, but by the certainty of her swift and terrible retribution. She was feared, but for the first time in their lives, the meek of the wharf felt something akin to hope. This was Euler's kingdom, forged in pain and sealed in violence. And she thought it would be her whole world, until the day the sky turned black. It wasn't smoke or smog, it was a creeping, unnatural darkness that rolled in from the sea, a phenomenon they called the Black Fog. It swallowed the light and brought with it things that scrabbled and shrieked in the dark, creatures of nightmare that hunted men. The city's army, long absent from the affairs of the slum, suddenly appeared, building ramparts, fortifying positions, and conscripting anyone who could hold a weapon. The fog was a predator far worse than any gang leader. It threatened everyone, the strong and the weak alike. The Snake Queen's small kingdom was meaningless in the face of apocalypse. Euler knew she had to fight. She couldn't protect her people by staying in the wharf. She had to face the source of the threat. She left the slum in the hands of a few trusted lieutenants and enlisted, her name and title meaning nothing to the brisk, uniformed officers. To them, she was just another recruit, another body to throw at the darkness. She was assigned to a platoon being marched to the outer ramparts. The mood was grim, a collection of hardened soldiers, terrified conscripts, and grim-faced mercenaries, as they lined up for equipment distribution. Euler felt a jolt of recognition. A few places ahead of her in the line was a woman with a confident posture and a familiar, determined set to her jaw. She was older now, her face etched with the lines of 100 battles. But Euler would have known her anywhere. It was the girl who had given her the popcorn, the girl who had shown her that strength could be used to protect, not just to dominate. Euler's heart, which she thought had turned to stone years ago, gave a painful thud. She felt like that small, scared child in the alley all over again. What would this woman think of her now? Would she see the Snake Queen, the brutal enforcer of the slums, and be disgusted? After receiving their gear, the platoon leader, a scarred veteran, called for a woman to step forward. Sergeant Tracy, he barked. "You'll be leading this squad. Get them acquainted." Tracy. The name hit Euler with the force of a physical blow. Her savior, her inspiration, had a name. Sergeant Tracy turned to face her new squad, her eyes sweeping over them with professional appraisal. Her gaze passed over Euler, lingered for a second with a flicker of confusion, and then moved on. She didn't recognize her. Of course she wouldn't. The dusty, weeping child was long gone, replaced by a cold, coiled warrior. "Listen up," Tracy said, her voice the same one that had commanded Jax to stop, but now honed by years of military discipline. Out there, on the ramparts, you are not recruits. You are the wall. You hold the line where everything behind you falls. I expect you to fight. I expect you to obey. And I expect you to watch each other's backs. A chorus of, "Yes, Sergeant," answered her. Euler's voice was lost in the crowd. The march to the ramparts was grueling. The black fog was a constant presence on the horizon, a roiling wall of darkness from which inhuman sounds occasionally drifted. That night, the fog rolled in. Alarms blared. The attack came suddenly, a wave of twisted, chittering creatures pouring out of the gloom. The battle was chaos. Steel rang against the titan. Screams mixed with the unholy shrieks of the monsters. Euler fought like a phantom, her slum-honed instincts serving her well. She didn't hold a position like the trained soldiers. She flowed through the battle, a deadly current in the tide of violence. Her kicks, once used on human thugs, now shattered the exoskeletons of fog beasts. A skull crack here, a disabling blow there. She was an artist of single-target elimination, a perfect assassin in the chaos. She saw Tracy fighting like a lioness, a shield in one hand and a short sword in the other. She was the anchor of their line, a bastion of pure, unyielding strength, while others gave ground. Tracy stood firm, her face a mask of grim determination. A massive, mantis-like creature, larger than the others, broke through the line and lunged for Tracy from her blind side. She was occupied with two other beasts and didn't see it coming. There was no time to shout a warning. Euler acted on pure instinct. She pushed off the wall, her body a blur. She flew through the air, twisting, and slammed both of her feet into the creature's armored head. The impact sent a shuddering jolt up her legs, but it knocked the monster off course. It stumbled, giving Tracy the split second she needed. She spun, her sword a silver arc, and decapitated the beast. Tracy turned, her chest heaving, and looked at Euler, who had landed in a crouch. This time, her eyes held recognition, not of the child, but of the warrior who had just saved her life. Good instincts. Soldier, she said, giving a curt nod of approval before turning back to the fight. They fought side by side for the rest of the night. A strange and deadly partnership. Tracy was the shield, the immovable object. Euler was the serpent, the unstoppable force that struck from behind the shield. They moved with an unspoken synergy, Tracy creating openings that Euler exploited with lethal precision. And dawn finally came, pushing the black fog back. They were left standing on a wall, littered with the corpses of monsters. They were exhausted, battered, but alive. Tracy approached Euler, who was cleaning the ichor from her boots. "You're not a regular soldier," Tracy said. It wasn't a question. I've never seen anyone move like you. That control, that patience. It's like you wait for the perfect moment to strike. Euler looked up, meeting her gaze, in the place I'm from. You don't get a second chance. You make the first one count. Tracy studied her face, the pieces clicking into place. "The wharf," she said softly. "Liberty Bird Wharf. I remember. A little girl in an alley." Euler's breath hitched. "You gave me a box of popcorn." A slow smile spread across Tracy's face. A real smile, like the one from all those years. "I knew I recognized those eyes. You're not that little girl anymore." "No," Euler said, her voice quiet. "I'm not." A silence fell between them, filled with the weight of years and the unspoken chasm of their different lives. Euler had to bridge it. She had to make her understand. "After you left," Euler began, her voice low and steady. "I made a choice. I decided I would never be weak again. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be like you." Tracy's expression softened. "You've more than succeeded, Euler." What she did. "You're one of the most dangerous fighters I've ever seen. They have a name for me back in the wharf," Euler confessed, the words tasting strange on her tongue. "They call me the Snake Queen." She watched Tracy's face, expecting a flicker of judgment, of disgust at the brutal title. But Tracy just nodded slowly. "A queen who protects her people," she said. "There are worse things to be called. You used your strength to build something, to create order where there was none. You did what you had to do." Tears pricked at the corners of Euler's eyes, the first she had shed since that day in the alley. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a profound, overwhelming relief. Her hero didn't condemn her. Her hero understood. All I ever wanted, Euler said, her voice thick with emotion.
Looking at the woman who had unknowingly shaped her entire existence.
I hope I could be like Tracy's sister. The words hung in the air. It wasn't the plea of a child wanting a protector. It was a declaration of an equal, asking for a bond, a sister in arms, a family forged not by blood, but by a shared will to stand against the darkness. Tracy stepped forward and placed a firm, calloused hand on Euler's shoulder. Her grip was strong, steady, and full of acceptance. "You already are," Tracy said, her voice full of a warmth that banished the last of the slum's chill from Euler's heart. "Welcome to the fight, sister." Standing on the ramparts, with the vanquished horrors at their feet and the promise of a new day breaking on the horizon, Euler was no longer just the snake queen of a forgotten slum. She was a soldier, a savior, and a sister. She had coiled in the darkness of her past for years, waiting, and had finally struck, not at an enemy, but at her own destiny. Claiming it as her own, Blackfoot had found her footing.